in a world full of people trying to be leaders, we also have to learn to be followers as well.
So you do think like this feminist movement is hurting women more than it's helping them out?
What's more rewarding, a woman who is staying home and taking care of people who love her, or a slave to people who don't even care about her?
Parents are struggling here to raise their kids.
We're facing a lot of threats. I mean, listen, I don't know, like this might be an unpopular opinion, but I feel like you can't have your daughter in a bikini on the beach at 8 years old, and then 9 years old you tell her, hey, it's time to wear hijab. Doesn't work that way.
What's one thing that you saw your parents do that you said, I'm definitely not gonna do this with my kids?
Mama and Papa, I hope you're not watching. God's gonna choke you if you don't do this. You're gonna go to hell because you don't cover your hair. Am I gonna get canceled?
Was it hard?
There was a few times where, he was like, you gotta say this word instead of that word. It's a good question. You're kind of made to feel like, if you're not working outside the home, you're not doing enough. I'm so happy you asked me this question because I think that...
Before we start today's episode, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your day and giving this podcast a listen. And I also wanted to remind you that the only way this podcast will ever grow is with your support and with your help. So subscribe to the podcast, like this video, and now let's get the show started.
Welcome aboard Middle East Airlines.
والمتوجهة إلى
طيران الشرق الأوسط يرحب
مدينة القدس العربية.
Mariam, welcome to Not From Here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So I want you to first introduce yourself. For those who don't know you, who is Mariam to Mariam, not just how the public knows Mariam?
So that's a good question. Mariam to Mariam is, I'm a mother of two, a wife, been married for 13 years now. And I love that part of my life the most. I cherish it. It's the most precious to me. And I've been writing books now for a couple years, Islamic books for children. And I'm kind of a part-time journalist whenever I have the time, inshallah.
How did you end up here? So it's a tradition on the show that when the guest comes on, they tell us, how did they become not from here? What brought you here or your family here? What's the story?
So I'm second generation. My family, my dad came here from Kuwait. We're Lebanese, but he lived in Kuwait for a while. He came here when he was like 18, studied engineering, worked for the county, for Wayne County for a while. And my mom came here when she was about 3. So we grew up, we were born and raised here, went to all the public schooling in Dearborn Public Schools, graduated from Fortson High School in 2007, went to Wayne State University, got my bachelor's in journalism and then my master's in teaching. Had children, got married, had children. And yeah, here I am. That's how life started for me.
How is your relationship with home, with Lebanon?
Believe it or not, I have not been to Lebanon since I was 4 years old, but I'm going down on June 10th for the first time.
Oh, you booked the ticket?
Yeah. But everybody around me, my mom, my dad, my in-laws, my husband, my friends, they've always gone down and spoke about the country and how much they love it and the beauty of its landscape. And so I'm really, really excited to go down for the first time.
How do you feel the relationship is like? Like when someone brings Lebanon, when you think Lebanon, like genuinely inside, does it mean that much to you, or because you haven't been there?
Yeah, so I've always just wanted to see the home country, right? I've always wanted to feel connected to it, but I hadn't been just because I grew up here. But I think my parents did a pretty good job at maintaining that culture of, the wajibat or, just certain hospitalities and things that you learn as you get older. And that side of Lebanon, just the formalities and the culture of it. I want to go see it for myself. Where did this originate from? How, how do people live there? How did the values that I've learned, I want to go see their, the original form,
You write children's books. How do you know what kids like? You know kids nowadays have short attention spans, and there's, how old are you?
I'm 33.
So there's from between you and your target audience, there's at least 25 plus years difference? How do you know what would interest a little kid, or how to cater that type of media to someone that's that young?
So it takes research for sure. And honestly, before I had kids, I would have told you I really don't know how to write a children's book, a proper children's book. But I did do some research, kind of like about not only illustrations, but certain words that you can use, and how to keep your sentences short but concise, and you get the message across. When I wrote my first books, the theme of those books was I was trying to see like what wasn't on the market in regards to like Islam or teachings and principles that I can convey in an easy way. Now, my daughter at the time was 5 turning 6. So the goal was to write for older kids, but I still wanted it to be at the level where with supplemental help, my daughter would be able to understand. And we had a bunch of books at home, for their level. So I was able to kind of get an idea of which books they were mostly engaged in. Rhyming words. They loved the rhymes. They loved that scheme, They loved illustrations that, were simple, not too vague, not too abstract, things that, you could easily explain just through if a child was too young to read the text, they can see what was going on just based on the image. So things like that.
Your kids were kind of the review process.
Yeah, basically.
So a big part of it is having kids.
Well, I mean, I'm sure research helps. I'm sure a lot of teachers or people who are around kids a lot in children's environments, nieces, nephews, things like that. It's doable, but it's not as easy as one might think, just because it's something that's short, and it's not many pages. It's not like a chapter book. You would think that it's so easy, but it's actually not. It's very difficult to kind of simplify language for kids.
How much time did it take you to make that at least first book?
So To Enter His Gardens, that series was 5 books. I would say I went back and forth a lot. I had made so many changes, but it took me about like 3 to 6 months to write all of them. Because we kind of went back and forth, like, you got to add this, got to not do this, just to make sure they were perfect. The Echoes of Stones, actually, I wrote it very quickly. I wrote it in like an hour, I still made some changes to it, but Echoes of Stones, I was like really passionate. So I finished it very quickly.
So, and this is something that I'm also curious about. So you create these books, you put them out. How do you, so the way I think about it is regular books, the ones you and I read, are like you go on Amazon, for example, you read the reviews, like so a lot of people talk about them. With children's books, how do you get the reviews? Like, how do you know if this book was actually a hit, if the kids liked it, if the kids didn't like it? What's, especially because, again, they're young.
Yeah. So, you'd be surprised. A lot of times I do get kids that come and tell me like, I love this book or I love that book. That one's my favorite one. And I ask them, which one is your favorite part? And they will specify. Like, I had another girl the other day that told me, I love pray, pray, pray when he's doing wudu, because I do wudu, So you kind of get those reviews in that way. And then, of course, the parents too. Like, the parents will tell you, oh my gosh, this was so nice. Or, I would hope that people do give me like honest feedback if they are critical of it, or how I can improve. I haven't gotten that yet. Hopefully people can give me that. I'd love to hear that. But yeah, that's how usually it happens.
Do you get inspiration at all from books that were written overseas, or?
No, because my language in Arabic, my reading language, reading in Arabic is not so fluent, Okay. Yeah.
I always thought about how would you cater a book towards the youth of this generation here in America versus the one in Lebanon or overseas. Like how's the approach different to both of those?
So from what I'm understanding is that, so I did think about having my books translated for, kids in the Middle East or whoever around the world, Muslim kids. And from my understanding, there's not so much of a difference. I feel like there's a lot of, with this age of, everything digital and social media and I think the struggles are the same as far as like Islamic principles go, conducting yourself properly on social media and things like that. So I think that it would just kind of be more of a language, trying to make it like accessible for them. But I think the concepts are pretty, across the board, I think they would be, they'd reach the same.
The responsibility, like writing one book is something, but I feel with an Islamic book, there's way more responsibility. You're spreading a message to young kids, you're getting them like right when they're developing, like at that critical point, and that's when you're feeding them information. What kind of pressure does that kind of put on you while you're in that process of like trying to write the book?
So I'm so happy you asked me this question, because I think that now with social media, everyone feels they're entitled to an opinion and they have a platform, and everyone just says whatever it's on their mind. We're not, and I was like this at one point too, right? We're not like cautious of the things that we say because we think that we know enough or we know more than whatever. Before I started writing my books, I had my brother-in-law tell me, you should make sure you get this checked by a scholar. And, at the time I was like, really? But like, I'm not really writing anything that's not common sense, but he's like, but just for peace of mind, get it checked by a scholar. And that was the best decision I've ever done, because now everything that I do, every work that I write, anything that I'm going to post publicly that, I feel I'm concerned about, or anything that I write as far as a book, I consult with a scholar. I think that's very important, because our capacity for knowledge is limited, especially in Islam. Like, I didn't study Hausa. I didn't, I don't have a credible background of Islamic, jurisprudence or study. So I think it's very important to seek guidance by a scholar. And we need to, in a world full of people trying to be leaders, we also have to learn to be followers as well. So like, seek guidance when you know your limited capacity.
Did the scholar give you any points, like critical points about, because you can use maybe that criticism or not criticism, but those points that the scholar gave you, you can really use them in different aspects of your day-to-day life too, like when you're talking to people. So what were like the points that he gave you?
So in some of the books, like the book about hijab, right? Like he told me like it was great. However, he's like, I want you to tackle other issues that not a lot of people talk about. Right. So he wanted to push me a little bit to not just talk about, what hijab means and how special it is, but proper hijab, how you properly are supposed to dress modestly, not, baggy clothes, 1, 2, 3, and just your demeanor, your behavior. It's not just about the girl is a pearl and the shell is her oyster type thing. It's deeper than that. And I remember somebody wanted me to go speak and give a lecture after I published my first book. And I asked the scholar and I said, what are my parameters about this? Because I'm not a scholar. Like they want me to lecture, and he was like, yeah, you shouldn't go up and talk about things that can be misconstrued, or you can misguide or mislead and things like that. He's like, you can talk about things that are, basic common knowledge, but I wouldn't go into the lives of, certain individuals without proper research or knowledge and things like that. So I know my limits, and it really made me cautious, which I'm so grateful for, because you never want to be the reason you mislead somebody or misguide somebody. It's a big responsibility.
Of course. And you said we have to learn how to be followers and like switch between that and trying to be a leader. And everyone's trying to be a leader. How do you think we get to that point where we can see someone and be like, oh, I should follow here, or I should listen, and just having like that dynamic, being able to switch from listening and then doing the actions and leading other people? How do you do that?
I think a lot of it stems from our own ego. Sometimes we, you do things, you want to make sure, first of all, you want to do things for the sake of God and only for God. So sometimes you have to kind of swallow your own ego. Even if you think you're doing the right thing, or you think you're right in a situation, or you don't see anything wrong with a certain issue, acknowledge those who have more education or knowledge than you. Even if sometimes, I might learn something that doesn't sit right with me, but I have to acknowledge first that I don't know enough about this subject to have an opinion on it, like a proper opinion. So when I know that somebody does have the knowledge and did study for a certain amount of time or has this specialty in this area, you kind of have to trust them, So it's about swallowing your ego, fighting that feeling of, no, I know more, and, and obviously putting your trust in God. But I think that's one of the things. I could have easily written my books and not had a scholar look at them. I could have easily done that, and I'm sure they would have been fine. But it was very humbling for me to be like, no, like, take a step back. Let's make sure you're doing the right thing for your peace of mind. And,
Was it hard? You just worked for 6 months on these set of books, and now you're probably thinking, maybe he tells me like, no, I can't publish this, or maybe I can't publish that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you
Yeah, I got nervous a few times for sure. There was a few times where, he was like, you got to say this word instead of that word. And I was like, but it doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't rhyme well. I have to fix the whole sentence, But I like you said, I swallowed it, and I was like, you know what? He knows best. And it's not to say like, don't trust yourself, or don't trust your instinct. But I think you just have to have just like this level of understanding that, you don't know everything, So
especially when it comes to like Islamic stuff,
Right.
Maybe you get a pass and other criteria. You said you're a journalist. Maybe like within journalism, you would be able to take a hard stance and be like, oh no, I trust my skills. I trust what I learned.
Because like stylistic things or like, there's flexibility in those things because sometimes they're just preference, right? But when it comes to Islam, no, like that's not something I try to, if the scholar's telling me you need to say this instead of this, he knows, or even like it came down to a verse in the Quran. So I remember for the echoes of stones, and I can tell you this, I don't know, in order to figure out the title for the echoes of stones, I did this thing with my last book, which I was inspired by the author of the book on Shahid Ibrahim Hadi, if you've ever read it. He was looking for inspiration to title his book, so he opened the Quran with that intention, and first thing he read was peace be upon Ibrahim, and that's what he named it. So for to enter his gardens, I did that. And the Quran, like I kept seeing repeatedly how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the heaven and paradise as gardens beneath which rivers flow. So that's why I titled it To Enter His Gardens. Then for the echoes of stones, I when I opened the Quran, I had the intention, but I didn't title my book from the verse that I found, but I put that verse in the book. It was about like truth and falsehood and like, trying to diminish that. But when I put the translation in, the scholar told me this isn't the right translation. Like, make sure that you put this and fix that. So I was so grateful for that, because otherwise I wouldn't have known.
Parents are struggling here to raise their kids. You mentioned that being a mom and being a wife is like one of the most important parts of your life. And I see this with my friends that have kids, and I'm listening to other people too. How hard is that struggle of raising kids here? And what are you going through personally too?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we're facing a lot of threats, I think, to the innocence of children. Nowadays, the family unit is being attacked. I feel like the woman is being targeted in the home. You're kind of made to feel like, if you're not working outside the home, you're not doing enough. A lot of people, I feel like, don't see, and not so much in our community, but like, outside of it, like you feel like motherhood is underrated, or it's always painted as this like exhausting, tiring task. Like, yeah, it is, but it's also very rewarding. Now, as far as my kids go, again, I know that there's a lot of things that threaten their innocence, and it's different than we were growing up. Like, people will tell me all the time, well, we can go into the discussion if you want, but like, oh, we went to public schools, we turned out just fine. Okay. But did we really turn out just fine? That's first of all. And second of all, the way that time was back then is different than it is now. Like the screens, for example, like we grew up on TV. Like I grew up on TV. My husband grew up on TV. We used to watch TV all the time. But now the things and the content that's on TV is just too much. And so my kids have limited screen time, very limited screen time, like a half hour a day. And it has to be on the TV. I have to see and hear what they're watching. Because it's not worth it. Like it's not worth, if I'm allowing things into their mind to poison it, they're going to turn out, it's going to be my fault, right? So these types of things we have to be very careful about. Screen time, who they surround themselves with, who I surround myself with as a mom, who me and Hussein, my husband, surround ourselves with. Our demeanor, our actions, because children learn through observation. They learn through what we do, So it's a lot of that. It's much harder to parent nowadays. It is. But alhamdulillah, like it's also the most rewarding job, and I'm very thankful to be a mom. But it definitely comes with its challenges.
You said, who said that we turned out just fine? Mm-hmm. And it's a discussion, Mm-hmm. Like even your parents will tell you, no, we used to do this with you guys, and look, you guys are great. Mm-hmm. But in reality, like if we all got messed up along the way, mm-hmm. we're not going to be able to see it because there isn't someone that's overlooking us like you overlook your kids, mm-hmm. right? And your parents or my parents, or they won't tell us like, yeah, we messed up here and mm-hmm. we messed up there. Yeah. And they were very trustworthy, I think, our parents. They were at a time when we would go out and play with the neighbors' kids. We didn't, we had fun. We would go outside and play, and, our parents would lock us in a room with all of our cousins and things like that. But I feel like nowadays it's harder to do that. You can't always trust that your neighbors' kids are going to be a good influence on your children, So, and I don't know. I mean, I think obviously God helps, guide and things like that. But there are things that I feel like from my childhood, I would have turned out differently if things were different, And it's not, my parents knew haram. They did what they could at the time, and that's what they knew. But I just feel like that argument that, we turned out fine. It's like, well, we all are riddled with a lot of issues. Like you can't just act like we're totally perfect human beings, because we're not, You said the solution is, or part of the solution is really like acknowledging like, okay, you can't get this much screen time. You can't hang out with these people. But it sounds like restrictions. Mm-hmm. You don't think like those restrictions would at one point hurt the kids too? Like what can we find a solution that would give them more freedom, but inside like a safe space where they can really actually do whatever they want?
Mm-hmm. So here's the thing. Children are born perfect, right? They are born innocent, like they're pure, right? So the first 7 years of their life is very important. And what we're trying to do is maintain that innocence of these child, their fitra, their pureness. We don't want it to be polluted, okay? So their fitra is closest to God and connected to God in those years, right? So if anything, restrictions of screen time and stuff, it's not, I don't consider it a restriction if the child has not been exposed to it, because they don't know what it is, right? Like you're not really going to feel restricted from something you've never been exposed to.
Unless they see other kids do it.
Right. But that's why it's important to surround yourself with families who are like-minded, right? So like for us, they go to a private school, everybody in that private school is on the same page. The parents go to monthly meetings with the lead scholar where we sit and we talk about, the damaging effects of screen time, so that all of the parents at that school were on the same page, to where if I want to send my child to so-and-so's house, I know that they're not getting excessive screen time. You know what I mean? So when you keep those close circles, I think it's important, that the child doesn't feel like they're left out. Like I would hope that, when my child is at a certain age, not everyone around them is going to be getting phones and cell phones because everyone around them is going to be on the same page. And then again, like you want to always make sure that you're maintaining that purity for the kids. And that's my responsibility. As they get older, I think it's important to have protective exposure where you talk to your kids about certain things. You talk to them that just like there's certain foods that you eat that are healthy for your body, there's also foods for your soul. Like anything that you put in your soul, anything you watch, you hear is going to affect your soul. And having them build that connection with God and just spirituality and understanding through a very practical way. The way we grew up, at least the way I grew up, was that like, okay, God's going to choke you if you don't do this, or, you're going to go to hell because you don't cover your hair. Or like it was just very fear-based. It wasn't from an understanding of...
It wasn't love-based.
Yeah, and also, again, like I said, children learn through observation. If I'm going to be doing one thing, like if I'm not going to be dressed modestly, my daughter's not going to have respect for the hijab. I can tell her this is how hijab is, but if I'm doing something different, she's not going to respect it. So again, I think children will yearn to be like their parents if their parents do emulate a certain thing in the right way. And I think that Islam is a beautiful faith, and I think that children naturally feel inclined to the truth. And I think if we do our part, they won't feel like they're being restricted. I think if anything, they'll feel free.
I don't have kids, right? So I'm just going to like answer based off of like how I think. Like you said about the whole private schools, it's like they're in the private school and they're like-minded, but the reality is most of the people don't have their kids in private school, and maybe like that, and maybe they don't have the means to put their kids in private school. Right. So when you have that and like this like small knit community where they're all like-minded, and then you have a kid where their parents, let's say, just came from overseas and they have to put them in public school, and then this kid is exposed to a bunch of different things, because when, like, we know in public schools it's like all out war basically. Everyone's doing something different. You have your people that are with you in the same faith. You have very different diverse people. What do they do? Like, is it just, I hope nothing bad happens and just ride along?
So I think that even us as this community that we have of like the private school, I think we all have a duty to, because we're learning, right? We're learning from the scholar. We're learning how, to deal with our kids, how to raise our kids and stuff. I think it's our duty too to teach those kids or those parents, like certain things that we're learning, in hopes that, they would, pick up from some of these things. Or I also think that I'm very aware that people can't all afford private school, and I know that homeschooling might not always be the best option for some families, especially for people that need to work. Both parents need to work, or whatever the case may be. But I definitely think, limiting certain things outside of the school is one thing. But I mean, listen, I don't know, like this might be an unpopular opinion, but I feel like if you really wanted to get it done and really wanted your kid out of public school, you can make it happen. I think that like too many of us right now, we want a lifestyle that is keeping up with the Joneses, right? Like, for example, like if you really wanted to afford certain things, like there's people who buy luxury designer bags or luxury, clothes, or, eat out, or, we can cut out a lot of those things if we prioritize, our children's education or our children's upbringing. I might get hate for saying that, but I do believe it. Mm-hmm.
No, definitely. And I'm sure there is a lot of, I think the hate will come probably from people that say like, no, we don't do any of that stuff. But I do believe that a lot of people do try to live above their means just to fit in with what's trendy.
Because some schools, some Islamic schools in our community are affordable, now I know like sometimes you might have 3 or 4 kids, it's challenging, but I think that it's worth the sacrifice, like at least for a temporary time, and it's easier said than done. I can sit here and tell you all day like, oh yeah, like I just won't eat out and I won't take vacations and things like that. It's much easier said than done, but I think we all have a taklif, and a duty, yeah, and so
I always think about what if. So I think about these kids that are in public schools and they come home and their parents are really trying their best to like teach them and God this and God that and do this, and then they go, and even us like growing up, like religion wasn't like your favorite thing to do, it's not that appealing, so what I think that what if you obviously keep it God-centric, but try to teach them it without attaching it. I don't know, if you attach it directly to religion and then something bad happens and then they have this hate relationship with religion, what if, and you tell me as a mom, what if you not all the time connect it with God and maybe just teach them the values without putting like a label to it? What do you think about that?
So I think that, again, that goes back to the way you introduce certain things, like God is always good. And the way of life that we are meant to live, in this way that we can earn, inshallah, like when we're trying to strive for like human perfection, a lot of things would make sense to them without even needing to, I mean, like for me, if we're just, I know we talked about this a lot, but if we're talking about the issue of hijab, right? Do you want people to respect you for the way you look or for how your mind works? Like, I feel like even for children, that makes sense. It's a very basic thing, but it makes sense, and
you have to be on it from when they were young.
Yes. Like my daughter, from when she was very young, we've talked about hijab to the point where like she knows, like by 9, she wants to wear it. Like she's telling me, I can't wait for
That's the difference.
Yeah.
Wanting to wear it, and at 9, here, that's what I was talking about, and I said what I said because I wanted you to say that, is at 9, you see girls that, okay, you're 9, you have to wear this. What is this? You have to wear it. And then she sees all the girls that are around her maybe wearing stuff that maybe they look nicer than her, and she feels left out, and oh my God, this is connected to God, and what is even God? And she's 9, and then that goes into like a bunch of different issues. So that's what it is. It's from when so making her want to wear it.
Yeah, and explaining these things, like from, like I said, like when you're very young, those first 7 years, like you can't have your daughter in a bikini on the beach at 8 years old, and then 9 years old you tell her, hey, it's time to wear hijab. Doesn't work that way. She's not going to be receptive to you. She's going to be like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't want to, because she's already been exposed to this, like this side, this, like her, because girls naturally, they love to feel beautiful, right? But there's room for that in Islam, but in a halal way, right? So when you've already exposed her to this, it's kind of hard to like backtrack. It's kind of like screen time, right? So you're exposing them to so much screen time. They're getting so addicted to watching their games or playing their, watching YouTube or whatever. And then you're like, one day you're like, that's it, we're done. They're going to have a heart attack. Like, no, what do you mean? I want to watch my show. And you have to, talk to them about it from the very beginning so they have a good understanding about it, right? With my daughter, even like, I remember I got a book. I bought a book about hijab, and I was looking through the pages, and some pages were of pictures of girls that weren't wearing proper hijab, like necks were showing and revealing clothes. And so I kind of went back and forth with myself on whether to show it to my daughter, because she saw me and she wanted to read it. So I was like, you know what, let me just see if she'll pinpoint, and I gave it to her. I said, Mom, there's something in there that I don't really think is proper hijab, but I want you to look at it and see which one you think. She pointed it out right away. She's like, oh no, she's not wearing, the right hijab. But we're in this era of like, what you do, whatever you want, do you do you, I'll do me, you do you, where people, they worship themselves, but you have to kind of teach the kids that, you know, without God, you wouldn't be here. And there's a higher power that deserves to be worshipped, because you can't even control your own body. Like, you can't stop hunger from happening. You can't stop yourself from using the bathroom. What makes you think that there's not a creator behind your mind? You know what I mean? Yeah. That you don't need a creator for your mind. You don't need a higher power to help you control your mind. And you even can't control your body.
I feel bad because, say, the way you said you're introducing this to your daughter, a lot of girls didn't have that, and even till now, maybe they're older and they still don't know better and they still don't understand it, and they're still struggling with it every day, you know. So it just, and like the you see a lot of these girls that wear it properly, they look down at girls that don't wear it properly and be like, no, and they give them so much hate for it, and then they look at the girls that actually wear it properly and be like, I don't want to be like that.
So judgmental.
Yeah, so judgmental. And like, you don't know what's happening between like, you don't know what kind of struggle the person is going through.
Right.
You know, like, she might be battling demons, and she needs like that lifeline, and then they go out in public and they get shamed for it and hated for it, and that even pushes them even farther away. So how, and within like women in general, like in that community, how do you personally navigate that?
So when we were talking about this, we were talking about raising my daughter, right? So like, about how I teach my daughter about how proper hijab is, because I use the examples of, you know, say the Zahra, say the Zainab, you know, but one should never judge a person's intentions, right? That's haram, actually. So like, but the issue comes when, and I think what people who dress modestly, or, you know, you're saying proper hijab, get frustrated with is this constant rhetoric of, don't judge me, you know? But when your actions are out there and you're posting pictures of yourself on social media and you're not dressed properly, you know, it's actually incumbent upon us to talk to each other as sisters, you know, and tell each other like, hey, like, we're all on this path together, you know? I'm not saying I'm better than you, you know, or anything, but we're all on this journey together. You know, there's a right way and there's a wrong way, you know? And of course, everybody struggles with things. I struggle with things. Nobody's perfect, right? And I guess a part of me just wishes that we move away from this like, don't judge me culture to, yeah, like, tell me like, how do I be better? How do I better myself? Not, I just want to stay stagnant in where I am. Nobody judge me, because we're not perfect. You know, we all have room for growth.
It goes back to the ego a lot too.
Ego is another thing, you know, again, you know, too many people want to be leaders and not people want to follow, and like follow, you know, God or his way. And so, but I do agree with you that a lot of girls maybe learned about hijab in the wrong way, or in a way that was forced, or in a way that, you know, just didn't, maybe, you know, they weren't fully ready to understand it, you know? But I think it's important that people take baby steps always, you know, about like just self-reflection and stuff. At least that's what I do. And I think that when I see a girl who doesn't wear hijab or doesn't wear it properly, my first instinct is not to look down on her. You know, of course, I think, like you said, everybody has a different situation. Everybody has a different, you know, experience and life experience. And I respect and love everybody, and I try to treat them with the same respect that they would treat me. But I don't think that, like, that I can't acknowledge whether I see something that isn't in my mind, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I can't look at her if a girl is dressed really bad or like immodestly and showing a lot of skin and tell myself that that's okay because she's been going through so much.
Between saying that's not okay, but
she probably has a certain situation that led her to this point or whatnot, and doesn't make her a bad person.
I think the problem in general, not about just hijab or religion specific, it's just we're looking at everything as if whatever you do, it's fine, you know, everything you do is okay. And we're not really putting that line where whatever you're doing is because of you're going through 1, 2, 3, but this is wrong. You can't do this.
Right.
You know, and it's just, I think that's what's damaging us the most.
And a main pillar of Islam is amal bil ma'ruf, you know, like forbidding the evil and enjoining the good, right? It's a responsibility on us. I mean, obviously there's an approach to it. You can't just walk up to somebody on the street that you don't even know or have a relationship with and be like, hey, you can't be doing this. But like in your circles, you know, people that you know and you love and you trust, you can talk to them in a very nice and diplomatic way. Like, hey, I love you. I care about you. But let's try to like fix this. You know, how can I help you fix this? You know, the approach is also important too. And I also, like, I know sometimes on social media, people will comment under people's pictures and be like, I can't believe you, like, maybe trying to do it in that way. Also, that way I don't think is the right way, because it's not going to be receptive. Like, they're not going to receive you well if you're going to go on social media and be like, hey, how dare you do this? It's haram. It's not going to work that way.
Yeah, or you're going to hell.
Yeah, you know, or astaghfirullah, sister. Like, I mean, yeah, it's on social media. She did it, or he did it. Not just girls.
Yeah,
men
course.
too. You know, men are just as at fault. But you know, that's not going to go anywhere. You have to know if it's going to be well received.
How long have you been a mom for?
Almost 8 years.
What's one thing, like a preconceived notion of what you're actually going to do when you become a mother? You know, like how you think before you get the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And like, what's one thing that you didn't even think about, that caught you by surprise? It was
how much it would teach me about myself. Man, like when you have kids. So I'm working on a book right now, editing it. It's about it's written by a scholar about, it's called The Other Me, and it's basically about your child as a perception of yourself. You know, as you're raising this child, you're also raising yourself, because my God, when you're raising a child and you're trying to do the best that you can, you become challenged in so many ways. You learn about yourself. You learn about your faults, especially because you want your children to be better than you, essentially. You want them to grow up to know so much about you. Be better than you, know more than you. And like when you're more aware of your own faults, you're trying to fix them. So you really learn so much about yourself. You grow so much. And that was something I did not expect. I just thought I was going to be like, oh, well, I know. I can take care of this. I know how to do it. My mom did it. I turned out fine. Just like, you know. But yeah, that's definitely something.
What's one thing you learned from your parents and you applied that to your kids? And what's one thing that you saw your parents do that you said, I'm definitely not going to do this with my kids?
Mama and Papa, I hope you're not watching. You know, my mom was always there, and my dad too. They were always letting us communicate. Like my parents, one thing I loved about them was they let us express ourselves, you know, when we were upset. We talked through a lot of things. And my dad too, like he would always hear us out. And they were the type of parents that would apologize if they did something wrong. So that's definitely something that I try to pass on to my kids. You know, I always want them to feel like they're heard. I want to be able to have that open line of communication. I want my daughter to feel like she trusts me with everything, and my son too. Like I want them to feel. I want my kids to feel like we're their best friends. You know. Do you have time for the second part? No, I'm just kidding. They were amazing parents. Well, I love them so much. But
of course, everyone loves their parents, and I'm sure you say you have the best mom and dad in the world. I say I have the best mom and dad in the world. But I think a part of growing up is looking at what they did and realizing that and maybe they didn't know better, but there are some things that they did that were wrong. And just because they did that thing that was wrong, it doesn't mean that I have to carry it on. I can acknowledge that they did their best, but this part maybe, because you said the kids have to be better. Your kids have to be better than you. They have to learn something from you and not do it maybe better. So it's just realizing that they made a mistake at one point, and I have to be better than that. I can't do this.
So I think like discipline, like the way they disciplined wasn't my favorite. Like I felt like sometimes like when we got in trouble, like we really got in trouble, you know, like it was like, no treats, no seeing friends for like, a certain amount of days, or a lot of yelling was involved. Even the occasional, belt would come out, so that's something I really never, like, not saying I don't yell. Everybody, gets to that point. Everyone has a breaking point, but I try my best to, I guess, because I guess like I try to adhere to like the Islamic way of parenting. So my daughter now just turned 7. So I'm being more firm with her now than I am with my other son, right? But you still get, when I go to my parents' house, like, oh, you're too nice to him. You spoil him too much.
He's a mama's boy.
He's a mama's boy. He gets whatever he wants. You need to be firm with him. Your husband needs to be firm with him, but that's not the Islamic way, and people talk about gentle parenting all the time, but I do think that obviously there's a difference. But like, you're just supposed to give your kid freedom. You're supposed to let your kid explore and do things, even if it makes you uncomfortable because you want your house to stay clean or whatever. Your child has an innate desire to explore and do things, right? So like, me stopping them is halting their fitrah. And what's going to happen by me constantly stopping and restricting them from like exploring things and doing things that might be naughty or messy, or we consider as naughty or messy, when they're older, because they weren't able to let that out, they're going to start rebelling. So I just wish my parents knew more about that.
How do you, because you mentioned how hard of work it is being a mom, how do you balance yourself taking the time that you need to recover and be there for yourself, and balancing that with meeting the needs of your kids and your household and your husband and all that?
So I think a big part of that, number one, is having a supportive partner, a spouse that like appreciates you and knows the hard work that you do and gives you a break. My husband, he works a lot, but the days off that he has, he's always taking the kids. He'll always like, hey, go do whatever you want to do. I'll give you some time. So that's really helpful. And my husband's also the type that, oh, you didn't, the house is not spotless. That's fine, or we can eat out today. Like that's totally fine. So that is extremely helpful. And you always need to make time for yourself too. Like, spending time with some friends, spending time in a good environment, having halal fun. You have to have halal fun. It's a big part of your spirituality. So, I think that's how you find that balance, is you have to, inshallah, have somebody who's helpful. And my kids are getting older, so I do have a little bit more free time now that they're at school full time. So I try to make use of the time that I have, time management. Yeah.
You brought up, and this it's like being spoken like under the table, and that's being a full-time mom isn't good. It's like you feel pressure, like, do I really have to go out and work so I can actually be like a valid woman in this society? And it's just not here in the city, it's everywhere. Like, they feel like there's so much pressure, like, I have to do something, I have to leave the house, I have to be working. And what kind of pressure, first of all, do you feel that pressure at all? And what do you say to those girls that like they genuinely want to build a household, they genuinely want like to raise their kids, they want to be present inside the house, and they just feel like they're not allowed to do that because they're looked down upon by society that doesn't like you're just not allowed to do that anymore?
Yeah. So I think that when I first started out and I went to journalism school, I got a lot of people like pushing back, like, what are you going to do with that degree? You're not going to make money, things like that. But I did it because I loved writing. Then when I went to teaching, I had my daughter, and then I did student teaching, so I left her. Now, during that time, like, people were like, are you going to work? Are you going to go back to work? You should, you'll be fine. You have help. You have the support. My mom and mother-in-law were like willing to help me. But this is what happened. During that student teaching time, my daughter was 6 weeks old. I would leave the house. I was like nursing at the time. So like it was the house was never clean. I'd come home, everything was all over the place. My husband would come home from work. He would have to, after a long day of work, he would have to help me around the house. More than usual, I think, to keep up, we would eat out, I was missing my daughter. I was feeling guilty. It just was so hard to balance it all, and me and my husband kind of came to the conclusion, like, okay, working moms, I give them so much credit because not everybody has the luxury of staying home. Okay. And I know that some people, they have to make ends meet. So, but it was just like, I was like, either something's going to suffer, my relationship with my husband, my child and their needs, my home, our how we eat, something's going to suffer. I'm not Superwoman. I can't do it all. So alhamdulillah, we were able to figure, agree that, staying home right now, my child needs me. I think this is the best route. And that's what happened. Ever since then, I had my son after that, and I couldn't get myself to leave again. Everything that I was doing, I couldn't put it as a burden on somebody else. Even though my mom and mother-in-law are great and they would have done a great job, but no one's replacing the mother. And so I feel like for women who are home and they're listening to this, what you're doing is enough, and Islamically, when you look at, a hadith and things like that, and you notice okay, even in God says that the Quran, is it in the Quran that heaven lies beneath the feet of the mother? That's not lightly. That's not said lightly. The things that you do as a mom, it's sufficient. It's important. You're raising hopefully productive members in society that will be good people, good human beings. There's no job more important than that, And I remember I saw this video not too long ago of this guy that was saying, what's more rewarding, a woman who is staying home and taking care of people who love her, or a slave to people who don't even care about her, corporations and stuff like that. And I thought that was very
that is
strong, I was like, wow, that's so true, so yeah, that's I guess what I have to say about that.
So you do think this feminist movement is hurting women more than it's helping them out?
The extreme, in the extreme, feminist sense, I do. I think that they're trying to take women away from the home and making them feel like motherhood is not enough and it's not sufficient, and breaking down that family unit and sending kids to, full-time daycares or whatever. And, those kids are away from their mother. They're having other people raising their children and teaching their children. And it just, I really feel strongly that the nuclear family, that the family unit, once it's broken down, society will start to break down as well.
Do you think you do think that mothers in general, there is an innate feeling of guilt that they do feel when they leave the house to go work and the kids are with someone else? Yeah.
So mom guilt, I think, is a thing that's real, and I also think it's a good thing. So because mom guilt, it's subhanallah, just it happens naturally. So whenever a woman is away from her child, whether she's going out to dinner for a restaurant, she's going on vacation, she's going to work, that guilt is there because we have an innate feeling and desire to be with our children. That is, it's how we are as moms, as women, it's built within us. So and I sometimes mom guilt sucks, but also it's good to feel it because you're okay, this guilt, this feeling is pushing me to be the best mom that I can be.
You lived through 9/11. How were you hijabi then? Did anything change from being a Muslim before 9/11 to being a Muslim after 9/11?
So at that time I wasn't in hijab. I didn't wear hijab until later on in life. But I did feel a shift for sure because I was in a middle school that was predominantly white at the time. So I remember kids were saying things about terrorism and Muslims and things like that. And I remember feeling I didn't understand it. I was in the 6th grade at the time, 6th or 7th grade. I think it was 6th. And I didn't really understand it. Like, I remember coming home and my parents were glued to the TV, and it was their anniversary, Haram, September 11th. And yeah, like none of it made sense to me at that young age, you know? Then as I got older and I started learning like what actually happened and whatnot, and how people were perceiving Muslims, and the skewed perception that the media had a hand in about Muslims and Islam, I started taking a turn in my purpose, like in school. Like, I just, you know, when I wore hijab in college and stuff like that, I constantly wanted to feel like I was fitting in and making people feel like, you know, oh, she's just like us, you know, she's just like us. That even sometimes I compromised my own beliefs and values to, not in a haram way, but like just like kind of like what I actually believed, just to kind of fit in, you know, like say things, you know, talk about things like that. I don't know. I felt like I wasn't being authentic because I didn't want people to look at me like I was like Muslims are bad or Muslims are, you know, extreme, or so I was really trying to assimilate, you know?
So we have like a feeling, like it comes with us that we want to fit in, you know. So a kid, like that's one of the things that like we die to do in school, like we want to fit in. Was there any type of like, I don't want to say hatred, but for a lack of better word, like hatred towards like they're talking so bad about these Muslims and now you can't fit in and you're a predominantly white high school, middle school. Did you ever feel like that hatred towards like what you are, and maybe try to shift away out of it because you wanted to fit in? And you maybe that young, 6th grade, you don't know any better, you know, you just want to fit in. And
yeah. So I think that, you know, I never really had that experience. But I can imagine that happening to a lot of kids, you know. I think that if you don't have a strong sense of identity in your family home or among your, you know, your you know, in your home life, you know, I think you would suffer from that. But I think that growing up in Dearborn, it was a little bit easier because there's so many people like you, you know. You're growing up with so many people, you know, that look like you, that have your name, that have your religion, you know, your parents know their parents and stuff like that. So I think for us in Dearborn, it was a little bit different. Even though I did go to all white high school, and mostly white people, kids were in the school. I don't know. I never really, maybe because I was too young, but I never really felt like self-hate. I feel like though, even nowadays, there are Arabs who self-hate, you know, because they want to be so progressive.
do you feel like nowadays it is better, but do you see it like maybe walking down the street in a foreign area, or being among like people that don't look like you, that have now like a better understanding of what you represent? Do you feel is that what's happening now?
Yeah, so a lot of times, like if I go to Florida or I go to other parts or I go up north where we're out of the bubble of Dearborn, right? Yeah, I feel like people like look at me and like are, you know, sometimes they look like, especially if they've never seen a Muslim before, or, you know, but I try my best to not assume that they're prejudiced eyes. You know, I try my best to assume that like maybe they're just curious, or maybe they know a Muslim, you know, that they see and I remind them of them. Because if you're always going to have that mindset that like everyone's prejudiced against you, you're always going to be in defense mode, you know? So I just try to give people the benefit of the doubt as much as I can. And I've had really good experiences. Like I've had people come up to me and, you know, compliment my hijab or want to know more, ask me questions. So that's kind of the mindset I try to have.
Okay, this is the final question, and we can wrap it up. What is a book, whether it's a kid's book or not, that is your dream book? Like it's a big project. What would that book be about?
I would like to write a book targeted to like teenagers, maybe young adults, about intentions. I started writing something similar to that, like kind of, I had this whole plot in my head and stuff, but
Would it be a story?
Yeah, it would be like a fiction story, but just kind of really highlighting, because I feel like we're in a world of God knows my intentions, but that doesn't really align with your actions, right? So I kind of wanted to write a story, about that concept, but in a very creative way that can get people to really think. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a religious text. It's just, something with a really hard lesson in it. But right now we've got like I'm working on some other projects, and so it's kind of hindering that project. But it's definitely in the works. I definitely want to continue that.
You're not gonna stop writing books?
No.
You fell in love with it?
Yeah. It's definitely like I feel like I've found my purpose. I feel like we all have talents, God-given talents, and I feel like, okay, I'm good at this, and I feel like it's beneficial. I feel like I'm doing something important, and hopefully like for this life and the next. So yeah, I definitely like, we have our next series is a series of just like highlighting personalities of people in history who went against the grain, for children, like for them to understand, like, you stand up for truth no matter what. So we're working on stories like this to inspire kids, to make them feel inclined always for truth.
Thank you, Mariam. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.